The wind came in off the southern coast, sweeping white salt spray against the windows of the old lighthouse. The structure stood on a rock-battered ledge just outside the small town of Eden in New South Wales, Australia. Once operational in the early 1900s, the beacon had been decommissioned decades ago and now remained as an uneasy relic. Locals would occasionally drive up the curve of the cliff road at sunset to see the sea, but nobody resided there. Until the evening when I came. I had rented out the lighthouse for a weekend retreat, paying the caretaker some money, signing the documents, hearing the warning. Don't stray past the fenced perimeter during high tide. I didn't listen to that. I had come to flee, to write, to experience the isolated life for a couple of nights. The road rose from the forest margin, overleaning gum trees whose limbs barked against the sky like giant fingers. I came as the sun just slipped below offshore islands, the waves transitioning from blue to charcoal. Within the lighthouse, furniture was scarce. An iron bed, a wooden writing desk, a little stove. I swung the tall windows open and let in the damp sea air. I filled a gin and tonic, sat at the desk and wrote the scene. The drive-in, the surf sounds, the fading of daylight. Later, I ascended the spiral stairs to the topmost room, where the great lens once turned, and gazed out over the rolling black water of the sea. A seal colony far away under white caps. The world was limitless. As night fell in full, the wind picked up. The waves pounded miles below. I flipped on the small bedside lamp and entered half sleep. At around 2 a.m., I woke up with a start. The wind had ceased. The sea lay completely silent. I heard nothing except a soft hiss of foam. Something in the quiet disturbed me. I got up, went to the window. In the shadowy moonlight, I could see a form, a dark figure pacing on the rock face below, among tide pools. It stood unnaturally erect, nearly human, but it moved slowly and with purpose, sticking to the rock like a shadow goaded into existence by the sea. I stared for an instant, thinking it might be a seal or the debris of some castaway. It lifted an arm, no, both arms, and stood there motionless, facing me, its outline clear-cut in the moonlit waves. I retreated, pounding heart. The windless night creaked the window frame. I crept back to bed and hauled the covers up around me. The figure stood there, unmoving, until I drifted half asleep. I found prints in the morning sand at the foot of the face of the rock, great bare prints, long toes spread wide and leading, up from the water's edge onto a ledge just below the lighthouse base. Odd. No man would climb there. I stood over it and had a squeamish feeling of intrusion. I tried to shake it off. Wild creatures, moonlight deception, echoes in the cave. I walked the cliff path that day to clear my head and try to lose the jitters. The forest around here was wetly scented with bark, eucalyptus, salt. Birds cried but faintly up in the trees. I came to a ruin of an old settler, splintered beams of wood, rusted metal nails, fallen walls. Someday someone had occupied this place long ago. As I faced around, I could hear the very slight sound of singing, or perhaps slight chanting somewhere further into the forest, low and drawn out, like a hymn submerged in mist. I stopped. There was no foot traffic through the forest at this time of night. I continued on anyway, back to the lighthouse. That evening, the wind came back with greater force. I was sitting at the desk, penning the tale that had stirred me to wakefulness earlier, the figure in moonlight. The desk lamp cast a dying flicker twice. I heard what sounded like a thrown stone hit the window. My heart quickened. I slid from the bed and went up the spiral stairs once more, opening the top room hatch and going out onto the gallery that ringed the lamp's ancient casing. The wind was gusty here, salt spray pounding waves. Down below the gallery, the seas gnawed at rock with pounding urgency. Next came a scraping, as of metal rubbed over stone. The figure from before appeared again, crawling deliberately up the vertical face of rock at the foundation of the lighthouse. The thing arrived at the underside of the gallery and halted. I stood over the railing and peered down into its face. A seamed, bone-white mask of flesh, eyes glinting like sea glass, black as coal, unblinking. It stared straight at me. My breath caught. I didn't hear anything else. No words, no sigh, just the howl of the ocean behind it. Then it started to ascend the supports of the gallery. I staggered back, falling over the ladder, crawling down to the base floor. I pushed against the heavy wooden door that went outside, to run. It didn't budge. The handle stuck. I pushed harder and ran out into storm-lit darkness. The wind pushed me off the path. Rain cut like needles. I continued down the rock path, bare feet now on wet rocks, adrenaline fueling me. I walked to the sea edge and turned around. The window of the lighthouse was lit with a solitary, flickering light. A person inside gazing out at me. I did not tarry. I ran past the ruins of the forest and to the motor car. I jumbled with the keys, leapt in, started the engine. Rain collected under the wheels as I turned the motor car onto the thin road that went off into the darkness. I did not wait for traffic lights, nor for any view. Drove on directly into the night, the headlights slicing through the gale. I checked into a budget motel in the little town of Eden. When I told the receptionist that I had rented the lighthouse, she stared at me strange. "Hard to get people in there at night," she said tactfully. "It's been vacant for decades. Some people claim they hear voices. Some say they've seen a ghostly figure on the rocks in the dark." I attempted to brush it off. "Ghosts," she added. "Or something worse. Something that took lives out there, off the ledge." I got little sleep. Light of morning was like relief. I made up my mind to go again, get my stuff and get out. But I wanted to do it in the daylight. I went back to the lighthouse mid-morning. The storm had passed. The sea was churning, but less furiously. I ascended the path to the base. No prints this time. I pushed open the door, stepped inside. All seemed undisturbed. On the desk, the paper I'd written, tangled, crazed scribble, still open. Good. I loaded my bag. Then I climbed the spiral staircase up, one final glance at the lantern room. As I came out onto the gallery, I could hear a low whisper, such as someone humming a dirge, very low and mournful. I stood still. The sound seemed to be coming from the landing. I peered into the shadows, peering over the railing. The sea pounded far beneath. Then I saw, sitting on the edge of the gallery, the creature once more. Its knees over the parapet, its arms wrapped around its waist, its head canted sideways. It watched me. I swallowed hard. It didn't budge. I convinced myself it was an illusion. I retreated into the lantern room, shut the door, locked it. I waited until my breathing slowed. Then I slowly descended, clinging to the rail. At the bottom, I emerged into the path and walked to my car without a backward glance. When I finally arrived home in Sydney, I spoke of what I'd seen to friends. They nodded respectfully. Others giggled. But one old native, whose kin had resided on the south coast for centuries, inquired, "Did you notice the footprints on the ledge? Did you hear the singing in the wood?" And when I nodded, he spoke softly. "You saw the near-drowned man, the one who crawled out of the sea following the tempest 20 years ago. People say that he never really returned. They tell us his body wasn't found, his mind shattered, and at the lighthouse, he waits upon the rock for the tide to reclaim him." I gazed at him. He went on. "They say he's the sea-hollowed, a man dragged from the waves, shattered, left to bleed by the stars. They say when the wind dies and the sea is still, you will see him standing there. You will watch him climbing the rock as if time is broken." I was chilled. Ever since I've stayed away from the south coast at night. I still write, but ghost stories no longer give me thrills. They haunt me now. For I know that the sea always keeps its secrets, and that the old lighthouse at Eden still stands tall. And every now and then, when the tide is low, when the wind dies and the rock face is slick and the moon is high, you'll see a shape like a man standing on the black ledge, arms out, watching the light, waiting for someone new.